Yes.
Perfect. Great.
Right.
So, welcome. Thank you all for coming. This is the evaluation workshop for the Know Your Neighbourhood Strand 1 evaluation. So, the aims of today's session, we're going to share the background to and plans for the Know Your Neighbourhood Strand 1 evaluation. We're hopefully going to be providing some clarity on the roles in the evaluation. So, this is between grantees, Libraries Connected, ERS, and RSM. We're going to be preparing yourselves for your role in the evaluation. So we'll be doing this through practical examples, exercises, and group discussions. And finally, we're going to be explaining what support is available to you all and what the next steps are. Okay, so the first half of the session will be quite a lot of us talking. We'll be covering the background to the funds. We'll be hopefully doing a bit of knowledge transfer on the evaluation generally. And then we'll be taking a closer look at what the actual Know Your Neighbourhood evaluation entails. We'll be looking at the research methods and tools we'll be using and finding what your role is in the process. We'll then pause for a quick check-in with you all just to take any questions. We'll move on to highlighting some of the key sections of the evaluation guidance before running through some worked examples with fictional participants of how staff might apply the guidance to fulfill the evaluation requirements. And then finally, for the final half, it'll be over to you just to spend some time thinking about your own projects and how you might embed the evaluation into your own work. We will break out into breakout rooms and we'll discuss this in these rooms. We'll have a bit of a Q&A and discussion. Then if we've got time at the end, we'll come back as a group and just maybe highlight some key points. Okay, so just an introduction to the ERS our study team. I would say let's go around and introduce yourself, but there is quite a lot of us, so I don't think we'll have time. But it is great to see so many of you here, and thanks for taking the time out of your day. We appreciate it. So first of all, my name is Dan Walters. I am a consultant ERS, and we are the independent evaluator appointed by Libraries Connected on behalf of the 3 cultural partners to deliver the Strand 1 evaluation. So essentially, my role is to support Libraries Connected, you and your teams to take part in and benefit from the evaluation. So just a bit on my background. I joined ERS in October last year. I previously worked with the Tyne and Wear Archives in Newcastle University on a research project looking at the history of health and environment in the northeast of England. And since I've been at ERS, I've worked on a variety of local and national evaluations. Some of the highlights are working on the evaluation of the Business Intellectual Property Centre National Network. So that was a great experience, to interview a range of different people and understand how different services operate within libraries. So I'm really excited to be able to work with you all to evidence your impact to DCMS and hope that I can use my experience to make the evaluation, a positive experience as it can be for you all. So in terms of the background to Know Your Neighbourhood, the Know Your Neighbourhood Fund was established by DCMS as part of the Civil Society and Youth Levelling Up Fund. So it's been delivered across 27 disadvantaged areas in England, as you all know, seeking to combat isolation and loneliness through boosting volunteer opportunities and empowering individuals to make social connections. So there are 2 strands. So Strand 1, which is yourselves, is providing up to £5 million. And this is just focusing on supporting outcomes around volunteering, social connections and well-being, specifically through arts, culture and heritage-based interventions. And Strand 2 is more of a place-based response, and this is coordinated by the Community Foundation UK and its local foundations. So in terms of the fund outcomes, you should be fairly familiar with them. As you know, they will have been the backbone of your grant applications, but we'll just have a quick run through them. So we've got, increased social connection, so for people at risk or experience chronic loneliness, there's increased social cohesion and pride in place, improved skills and confidence, improved well-being, and finally access to evidence and lessons learned. In terms of the priority groups for Know Your Neighbourhood, these are the 10 priority groups, and these have been identified to help with targeting the funding. Now, I know you may not have had sight of these beforehand, they might be new to you as they were drawn up, I think, after you submit your grant applications. So this is not a worry, I've read through your grant applications. I can see that your applications align with these very closely. It's a testament to really how well you know your neighbourhoods. So please don't be concerned at all if it's the first time you're seeing them. We're just sharing with them today just to really give you some confidence and affirm with what you're doing. So I suppose the key takeaway, oh, sorry, I suppose the key takeaway for this slide is that the fund is serving, a diverse range of people through a diverse range of projects all across the UK. I think a challenge for the evaluation is, capturing comparable data across all these groups, projects, and localities in a way that's both inclusive and accessible. This inevitably will involve some trade-offs, which we'll discuss a bit later on. But we hope through that the guidance we've produced and our continued support, we can try and find ways for everyone who takes part in your project to have a say in the evaluation in one way or another. So next up, we're just going to have a quick recap for the knowledge sharing event and just see what the Know Your Neighbourhood evaluation will look like and involve. Yeah, so I know most of you, if not all of you, will have been at the knowledge sharing event. I think it was about a month ago now. So I won't bore you and go over the same things again. But I think it's just a good idea to have a quick recap so that's fresh in your memory, just for when you get a bit of a chance for interaction later on. So last month we discussed what evaluation is and the reasons behind evaluation. I don't think I need to go into this too much. Covered it before and read your applications forms. I think you have a good idea of what evaluation is already. In terms of conducting evaluation, as you'll know, there's 4 key stages: planning, designing, collecting, and presenting. I did talk a little bit last time about how we'll be collecting the data, and today we'll be going into this into a lot more detail. And finally, we discussed the core principles of evaluation, which are, just to recap: clarity, integrity, independence, accessibility, trust, equity, transparency, and finally, diversity. So it is good to cover what evaluation is, but also what evaluation isn't. So I think sometimes people can, understandably so, get maybe a little bit protective when evaluators are appointed, as they might think that we're trying to find every little fault in their program project, but this absolutely isn't the case. Evaluation isn't about trying to lay blame at all. All we want to do is just gather the facts and present the evidence in an unbiased way. As I said in the knowledge sharing event, we know that you are the experts. We're not trying to gatekeep what you're doing at all. So for this Strand 1 evaluation, in terms of there is an overarching evaluation of Strand 1 and Strand 2. This is being conducted by RSM and NatSen. ERS are just conducting the Strand 1 evaluation, but both of the evaluations will build on the evidence based on how and to what extent the interventions in the arts, culture, and heritage sectors in areas of high deprivation can, and at this point it's twofold, as you all know: increase the availability of and participation in volunteering opportunities, and then finally support people at higher risk of loneliness. So in terms of just defining what a process and an impact evaluation actually is, so a process evaluation, this is more what works in increasing volunteering, reducing loneliness, and impact, we're looking at the extent of change in the Know Your Neighbourhood outcomes and for who. So I'll now pass you on to Catherine, who will talk to you a little bit more about logic models and theories of change and measuring outcomes.
Hi, I'm Catherine. So I'm another member of the evaluation team at ERS. So I'm working with Dan and Ray and Mel, who are also on the screen. So yes, obviously Dan's talked to you a little bit before about what evaluation is and why we do it, but we also wanted to show you one of the main tools that we use when we approach evaluation. Just this might be something that you're really familiar with already, might be old news, or it might be something that you're quite interested in, you want to take away, but we really wanted to show you this so you get an idea of what exactly it is that we're trying to understand in an evaluation. So a logic model, basically, as you can see on the screen, this is just a graphic that represents the theory of how a program gets to produce those outcomes and impacts. So some of those things, so understanding the process that Dan mentioned to get to the impacts that we also want to evaluate. So a logic model is basically a simplified way of representing the theory of change, which you might have heard people talk about, and you might know it as this. So a theory behind a program might be that if we've got this amount of money, we're going to spend that money doing these activities for people to connect with each other, and then that in turn will help them to reduce their loneliness. So it's just really drawing out all of those threads behind what makes change happen. So we come in as evaluators to test out that theory. We're wanting to understand what kind of things help people to feel less lonely and more connected to people and the place they live. This is just so that these things can be learned from, repeated in future, and we can continue to get those outcomes and impacts that we want to see. So a logic model has got 5 elements that we can see there in the example on the screen. So in the grey, we've got the planned work, and then in the pink, we've got the intended results of that planned work. So on the far left, we have the inputs, the things that the things that go into a program. So it's funding, the time available, the resources like staff. We've got then the activities, so the actions and events that will take place. We've got the outputs, which is the direct results of these activities. And then we've got the outcomes, which is the immediate effect of the program on the people it's working with, followed by the impacts, which are those wider impacts, longer term effects of the support. So you might be familiar with this already, as I said, but for others that might not have made much sense, might just be a bit theoretical and wishy-washy at this point. But if we go to the next slide, we've got an example of how we can use this. Great, thanks, Dan. So we've got on this slide just a sort of simple version of an example logic model. So we've come up with the example of any resemblance that this bears to any projects is purely coincidental. We've tried to make one that's applicable, but a little bit random as well. So we've got a conversation club for refugees and asylum seekers. So let's say that the idea for these conversation clubs came from the project organisation and the people they work with, noticing that refugees in their local community were saying that they were really struggling to feel welcome, struggling to feel integrated and make friends, and maybe that they weren't getting actually that many opportunities to speak English with people and have conversations. So they came up with the idea of having these conversation clubs, bringing together members of the refugee community and local people so they could get to know each other and have some chats. So to do this, they applied for grant funding, secured that grant funding, and this is part of their inputs. They've also already got the volunteers and the staff that they work with and the premises that they use. Then their activities are obviously going to be the conversation clubs themselves, but we know, again, that there's lots of other different activities that underpin that. So to make this happen, we need to recruit volunteers from the local community. We need to actually reach out to the refugee community, make them aware of what's going on, get them involved. Maybe we have contacting partners, maybe we've got posters, all of those kind of things. Then the outputs are most likely going to be those kind of things that we think of as those like funder targets, the things that we're counting. So the numbers of people who are taking part, numbers of clubs we're running, those sort of things we're putting on our monitoring forms. Then the outcomes are what we want to have changed for the people because they took part. So in this case, the project intended that the conversation clubs would help refugees to feel more connected, to improve their English, and then maybe also that local people would be able to build skills through their volunteering, and maybe that they would improve their impressions of the refugee community or understanding of some of the challenges that refugees face. Then we're hoping that those outcomes lead to more and wider impacts, more entrenched impacts. So that could be things like better community cohesion between different communities and refugees generally feeling more integrated, maybe having some of those chats at the club led to them feeling more confident to join other groups and things like that. So these aspirational outcomes and impacts are really important to set out right at the beginning of a project, because the evaluation will then test us, did these activities lead to those changes we thought we were going to see? And obviously we've come up with this as an example for a project, but Know Your Neighbourhood as a whole funding stream has got its own theory of change to explain how we expect this funding to lead to these outcomes that Dan mentioned earlier. So if we go on to the next slide then, when we come to look at those aspirational outcomes of Know Your Neighbourhood that Dan talked about, such as people feeling less lonely, having more pride in the place that they live, we want to understand how those outcomes have happened, and we're using some specific established measures to understand those outcomes. So you can see those up on the screen. Obviously might be new information and this is a lot of wording. These measures are sort of explained a little bit more in the guidance, and you can look these up as well. So, and we'll also share these slides. So this won't be the last time you're seeing these. So with these measures, with these things like the UCLA loneliness scale, I basically mean these are the questions that we're going to ask people to see if the outcomes have happened. That's what I mean by measures. And the reason that we're going to be using these measures to understand the outcomes is because they've been approved by the government and tested out by academics and researchers before, meaning that the findings that we're able to generate from using them will feed into the evidence that already exists. And so we hope will be more likely to be trusted by DCMS, by Treasury, and hopefully then can be used to inform future funding decisions. So we'll have more impact to say, what we're doing really works, and this is how we know that, and we can trust that that's true. So because we're using these established measures to assess the outcomes, you might kind of find that not every question that we're asking in the surveys or through the evaluation is perfect for every participant you work with. But the flip side of this is that we've got a really good opportunity with this, with Know Your Neighbourhood, working with so many individuals and so many projects, got a really good opportunity to get really robust evidence on loneliness on a massive scale. And we hope that this will make the evidence more convincing generally. We'll also be sharing all of the data that we get from each project back to you. So you'll be able to use the data that we collect on your project for future funding bids. And obviously this data will be using these established and respected measures. So we really hope that this will be an extra tool for you to be able to communicate your impact in the way that funders might want to see. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. So yeah, this kind of moves us on to what we're really hoping that your role will be in the evaluation and the support that we need from you to be able to get this information. So first of all, we'll be asking some of you, a small number of you, if you can take part in interviews for the evaluation. So interviews with us about your experience of delivering. There'll be interviews with us, and there'll also be interviews with the overall evaluator, who is RSM, but we'll be working with them to just kind of make sure we're not asking you twice and kind of limit the burden on you there. So these interviews will be short, maximum of an hour, and we'll be flexible to work around your timings. And we'll be in touch to kind of with some of you to arrange these soon. And we'd also really ask for your support to speak with some of your participants. So we're going to be running interviews and focus groups with some participants on Know Your Neighbourhood. And we'd really appreciate if you could help to facilitate this, our contact with them about this. Basically, we're very aware that they've got no reason to know who we are as ERS or to trust us. And so if that's able to come through you, we always find that this works best to kind of support people to take part in the evaluation in a way that's as easy and not scary as possible. And then lastly, and possibly most importantly, we need all of you to help us to get the surveys that we've developed out to as many people as possible and to support people to complete those surveys as needed. So we've prepared guidance for you on this, which we're going to talk through now as well. And we'll support you with the surveys as much as possible. So Dan mainly and some of the rest of the team will be meeting with you to kind of make sure that the way that the surveys are working make them as much sense as they can to the way you're delivering. And then hopefully you'll be able to benefit from the data that we get from these surveys as well when we share this back to you. Okay, so back to you, Dan.
Thanks for that, Catherine. That's really useful. So yeah, as Catherine has already highlighted, there are potentially three main ways that grantees will engage with the evaluation, and the guidance does include the advice and information about all these three elements. I think considering the survey is the backbone of the methodology, and much of the guidance does focus on helping you plan and deliver the surveys. They're core to our methodology. For the reasons listed, really, they allow us to measure and quantify the changes and outcomes. We can use validated measures that are credible to DCMS. They allow for a high volume of responses. We can discover trends and make comparisons relatively easily. This includes both Strand 1 and Strand 2, and they can be administered relatively easily. I think definitely there are, of course, cons. We will get a less depth of understanding, and there'll be less people-centered, which we recognize it can be difficult for some groups and individuals. So, for example, people with low levels of literacy, or perhaps people with a poor ability to recall information. Also people who are not used to taking surveys. Younger people, for example, aren't necessarily used to being asked questions about their perhaps ethnicity or gender. So on some evaluation projects, we do just ask all grantees to share, obviously with consent, the contact details of their participants and send out the surveys themselves. This is mainly when there's a single intervention delivered consistently in time to one type of beneficiary. But with the Know Your Neighbourhood Strand, this wouldn't get a good response rate because we don't believe for this type of project because of the range of people, projects, and locations involved. So that's why yourselves have been asked to help as part of your award contribution. As Catherine highlighted, it helps us to overcome the barriers and challenges, and it just allows us to tailor the survey's administrations to your context. Okay. And to help you with this, we've produced the comprehensive guidance on the surveys, which you may or may not have seen already. And the first step for you, I guess, is deciding which surveys to give to who and when. So I did go through this a little bit, the knowledge sharing event, but I think it would just be useful to go again just to really hammer this point home. And I didn't show you the diagrams last time, so it'd be nice for you just to see diagrams in action. So for the survey of evidence and findings to be convincing, we need, where possible, to capture how people will feel before taking part and how they feel afterwards. So we call these a baseline, which is a before survey, and an end line, which is an after survey. So this means that we can just measure the change in the outcomes and compare across projects, locations, and different groups. And as I mentioned before, across Strand 1 and Strand 2 activity. We do know that this isn't consistent, so we know that some interventions are going to be short and sharp. It might not be sensible to do a baseline. And in cases such as these, we developed an alternative survey, which we just do at the end of an intervention. And we call this a reflect survey, which you can see. So if individuals are engaging with your project often over a long period of time, then we'd recommend doing a midpoint survey as well. This is just so we can just see how the projects are performing in terms of the outcomes midway through. And it also allows us to feedback learning into your delivery. As I said, though, this would only really be for participants engaging over a long period of time. After each survey point as well, as Catherine mentioned, we're going to send you your own project data. This will just allow you to perform your own analysis if you want to help improve your projects. And we will also be producing interim and final reports, and these will aggregate the findings and learning across the programme. So this evaluation pathway, as we like to call it, a decision tree, has been designed to help you work out which surveys you need for your participants. I think importantly, it's important to note that it might differ by individual depending on the nature of their involvement with the project. So for each participant type, you will need to work through the decision tree to decide which evaluation pathway they should follow. So as you can see, the diagram on the screen, this is for the beneficiaries. And if I go on to the next slide, it is exactly the same for volunteers. It's the same logic. You know, if they engage infrequently for a short period of time, then they'll likely need a reflect survey. But if they engage fairly often for a fairly long time, they will need the before and after surveys. And if they engage frequently for a very long time, you'd have a midpoint. That's two. So as you can see, they're both the same decision trees. They just have different words in them depending if it's a volunteer or a beneficiary. So if we move on to the evaluation guidance and pathways. So this diagram in the guidance complements the evaluation pathway content. So it acts as a prompt for you to think about how you can embed the surveys into your own settings. So we will be doing some exercises later on, but the key point is that planning evaluation is in from the start. I know that some projects have already started, but you know, just trying to get that going as soon as possible. It just makes things easier. And as you will know, I'm sure, hopefully becomes routine over time, especially if you're adding new participants throughout your projects. So, the key point here is if your participant needs a baseline, this should be done as soon as appropriate. And like I said, I know some projects may have already started, but it's just trying to get this done as soon as possible. You don't have to do this on day one. It's not a fixed thing. We are flexible and we trust you to decide when the best moment is. So in terms of the key sections in the guidance, just to highlight a few, I'd recommend really going through the guidance in detail and trying to understand as much as possible, but just to highlight a few key sections. Section 3.3 is really important. How will I collect the surveys? Section 4.2 as well. sorry, to go back to section 3.3, this is all about, like, will you be doing it by paper, online, or QR codes? The section 4.2, which is support for project organizations and staff. We offer email templates and scripts for you to use if you wish. And Appendix B, we offer a list of aftercare support organizations as well. So I'll just pass back on to Catherine now, who will go through just a quick example with you, just to hopefully give you a taster of what you might be able to do.
Yeah, so we've yeah, as Dan said, we've come up with kind of some of these examples to give you an idea of, okay, so if your project's delivering in a certain kind of way, or you've got a certain kind of person taking part, what kind of survey pathway might you follow? When and how might you get them to do those surveys? So, a first example, we've got Sophie. So let's say Sophie's a new mum. She's kind of been persuaded by a friend to go along to a few sessions of something her friends tried before, which is a parent and baby session at their local library. So she really enjoys it. She has a great time. She's not really sure how she's going to attend in future, but she signs up to receive emails about any sessions that might happen in future. But then she does come along again. She really enjoys it actually, and she thinks, "Oh, maybe I could get involved a bit more." And she sees that they've got opportunities to volunteer in the sessions, and she asks about those and sees if she can sign up. So she signs up, and then that's really a more regular commitment. She's going to be coming along and volunteering and helping out in those sessions every week for about 12 months. She starts doing that. It's all going great, but unfortunately, then Sophie's circumstances do change, and she has to stop volunteering after a few months. So this is the sort of situation, and what we were thinking with this is that when Sophie first comes to these sessions, she might be very new to the organization. She might not really be sure what the sessions are going to be and whether they're going to be for her and whether she's going to attend in future. So we were thinking here, there's no commitment. We wouldn't necessarily be thinking that she needs to do a baseline survey. We wouldn't want that to put her off coming in future. We wouldn't want that to be a barrier in any way. So we just sort of not worry about the surveys for her in that case. She's then coming a little bit more, and that's fine. But again, it's more ad hoc. And so we might be thinking this is more towards the end of our delivery of these sessions. We might be seeing if people who've been coming for quite a bit would be able to do a reflection session, just saying in general what kind of impact going to all of those sessions has had for them. But it's not been a regular commitment. So we're not thinking baseline, midpoint, end line there. But then Sophie does want to volunteer, and that is a fixed length of time. That is a regular commitment. And so that might be a really good opportunity actually to get her to do a baseline survey. Even though she's already been to a couple of sessions, it is still the start of her regular engagement with the programme. So that'd be fine. And then we'd think maybe we're going to get her to do an endline survey once she's finished. But she does finish a bit early. So that would be the opportunity to say, could you please have a go at this endline survey for us? Maybe the last time she comes, or via email, we could send her that link at the end to just get her to finish that, do that endline survey, finish that circle, and say how she found that everything as she took part. So that's what we would think to do in Sophie's case.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'll go through an example with you as well. So we have Jeff here. So Jeff's recently moved to the area. He's recently lost his wife to a terminal illness. His daughter does live here, but he doesn't really know anyone his own age, and he isn't too confident using the internet to find out about local events. So when he's going about doing his shopping, he sees a poster at the local supermarket, and this is about a series of events at the nearby library, and it's about inviting people to bring along football memorabilia relating to the 1966 World Cup. So Jeff goes along to the taster session, and at this taster session, people are formally invited to join the project and to contribute to the exhibition once a week for the next 4 weeks. So this is a quite short project, short intervention, only 4 interventions really. So Jeff signs up. At the next session, he shares with the group that he's recently lost his wife. So as we can see here, Jeff might need quite a lot of support, mainly twofold ways. So first of all, in terms of perhaps his digital literacy, so, he isn't too confident about using the internet. So perhaps trying to direct him to use a internet survey or an e-survey might not be best appropriate. and in which case we might suggest the use of a paper copy of the survey in this instance, just because Jeff might be more used to this and he can perhaps have a little bit of support around him whilst he does it. And also Jeff's lost his wife, so we know perhaps he might be a bit emotionally vulnerable. So we'd want to make sure he's getting the best support he can really for the situation. Okay, and then our final example is James. So James is a 16-year-old student and he's taking part in a volunteer taster session at his local library. This has been organised by his college. So James really enjoyed the session. He decides he'd like to continue working with the library and he registers on as a young volunteer programme for the next 18 months. One of the staff members later on learns that James has SEND, so low levels of literacy and numeracy. This was after reviewing his volunteer registration form. So in this case, I think it would be good to maybe be sensitive to definitely James's age. He's 16. He might perhaps not have too much experience completing surveys. Like I mentioned before, being asked about gender or ethnicity, this might be a little bit strange to him. And then also, James has SEND, so he might struggle to perhaps fill out some forms and understand this, so he would need some support surrounding this. Okay, so I think what we'll do now is we'll move into an activity. So what I will do is I will stop screen sharing in a minute and I will share a survey link for you all to try in the chat. And what I'd like you to do is just try and imagine your volunteers or your beneficiaries taking the survey and imagine that your staff are administering the survey. Which evaluation pathways would your participants follow? What issues might staff encounter administering the surveys and how might you overcome these? And what other issues might participants encounter and what could be some solutions? After this, we'll split into 3 breakout rooms, which will be led by myself, Catherine and Ray. And we'll discuss this in groups. And if we've got time, we will come back and maybe pick out some key points. So I think the time is now just coming up to 10 past. So what I'll suggest is we'll come back at 1/2 past just to give you a bit of time to have a go, and we'll break out into breakout rooms then. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I will share the link in the chat. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, so I think everyone's back, or nearly everyone is back. So I know we don't have much time left, so I'll quickly just sort of pick out some of the key points that we discussed in my group. So definitely the levels of digital literacy. We discussed a lot about that. So a lot of volunteers and participants may not, very well versed using technology, so it's going to be quite difficult to get them to do the e-survey, and paper copies might be more suitable. I think my group also highlighted, actually sitting down with people at the end of a session, 5-10 minutes, and going through it with them could be really beneficial, just to sort of explain it, how it works and that kind of thing. I think we also brought up the gender question. This could perhaps put people off, asking people what gender are, and how do we kind of like mitigate that is something like to consider. I think as well, we also linked to digital literacy. We thought about like how the sliders might be a bit difficult for people to use. We said we can use them fine, but people with low levels of digital literacy might kind of struggle with this a little bit. We also talked about the phone number element and the project code. How do we kind of like, this can be a bit of an issue with people. You might not want to give away the phone number because it's quite a personal bit of information, even with the guarantees. So that was definitely something to consider as well. I think that's all I can read from my notes at the moment. Do you want to feedback anything, Ray or Catherine?
We had really, really similar themes in our group, didn't we? I think something else that has come up in this workshop that hadn't come up in others, where we're talking to museums and community organisations, is that a potential barrier to doing that survey might be the trust that people have. Library services were, Clover, you mentioned, seen as trusted services, but not necessarily local council always as seen as a trusted place to share your data. So I think that's something for us to think about and have explore more in our one-on-one conversations about how we get past that barrier.
Really interesting, and not something that we've had raised before. Brilliant. Definitely something we'll talk about in our team meetings, I think. And for my group, very, very similar themes. But we also talked about those specific beneficiaries who may have problems accessing the surveys. So those with dementia, learning disabilities, autism, those kind of things. And we talked around, you know, where it was appropriate to use the survey and where it wasn't, and how we would be doing those other conversations to get that data in different ways. And we were raised some really interesting information from Diane at Middlesbrough, who was talking about the fact that they're already starting to collect anecdotal information. So carers taking individuals back to a care home and saying, oh, this is, you know, they're taking with them the leaflet just to remind them of how wonderful this day has been. You know, that is absolutely valid piece of evidence that we want to be able to collect so that we can share that back, even if it is anecdotal and not robust. It's still something that we want to be hearing about. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you so much, Dan. If you want to wrap everything up, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, so that is basically, yeah, I'm aware we're just at time. I will just quickly bring up the slideshow for our final slide. So yeah, in terms of next steps, I think next steps is, if you haven't done so already, please read the guidance carefully. Decide which pathways you expect your participants and volunteers to follow. Think about what support they and your staff will need to help make the evaluation a success. If you could also schedule a call with myself within the next couple of weeks, just to discuss and confirm your approach. You know, we want to speak to all of you just to discuss any further issues or queries you may have, just to really nail down, because we want to make the evaluations, you know, as good as possible. Just due to there being 27 of you, Ray or Catherine or our other colleague Steph may also take some of the calls, just so you're aware. Finally, I will send you the survey, whether you request paper or online. Thank you very much. That's everything from us.